I've spent 35 years being the daughter who never complained, never asked for anything, and never stopped giving. And my reward, my father looked me dead in the eyes last Sunday and said, "Until you apologise to your sister, you're cut off. No room key, no Wi-Fi, nothing." I'm 35 years old. I own my home. I run data security for a Fortune 500 company. And my father just grounded me like I was 15 because I refused to let my sister access confidential patient files. Rebecca's smirk across the dinner table burned hotter than the shame crawling up my neck. My mother stared at her plate. The grandfather clock ticked like a countdown. I took a breath, swallowed every word I wanted to scream, and I said 2 words that would destroy everything they thought they knew about me. "All right then." What my family didn't understand was that all right wasn't surrender. It was the beginning. By morning, there would be an empty chair, a sealed envelope, and phone calls that would make my father's face turn white. "Have you ever been punished for having boundaries?" My name is Courtney Neal. I'm 35 years old, and I've spent the last 8 years building a career as a senior data security manager at one of the largest healthcare insurance companies in the country. I'm the person who makes sure that when you trust a company with your medical records, that trust isn't broken. It's demanding work, often thankless, but I've always believed that doing the right thing matters more than being recognised for it. That Sunday evening, I pulled into my parents' driveway with news I'd been waiting weeks to share. My team had just completed a massive patient data protection overhaul, and my director had hinted strongly that a promotion to the executive level was coming. For once, I thought maybe my family would see what I'd accomplished. The moment I walked through the front door, I heard Rebecca's voice, carrying from the dining room, animated and bright. My younger sister was holding court at the table, her hands gesturing wildly as she described her latest venture, some kind of online business selling wellness products. Our father Martin leaned forward with genuine interest, asking about her marketing strategy, her target audience, her 5-year plan. I stood in the doorway for a full 30 seconds before anyone noticed me. My mother Linda looked up first. Something flickered in her eyes, something that might have been guilt, before she smiled and said, "Courtney, sweetheart, come sit down. We saved you a plate." I took my usual seat, the one closest to the kitchen, the one that made it easy to get up and help clear dishes. Rebecca barely paused her monologue to acknowledge me. My father nodded in my direction without making eye contact, his attention still fixed on his younger daughter. Dinner proceeded the way it always did. Rebecca talked. My father listened with fascination. My mother filled the silences with comments about the weather and questions about whether anyone wanted more mashed potatoes. When there was finally a lull in Rebecca's presentation, I cleared my throat. "I have some news, actually. There's a good chance I'm being promoted to Director of Data Security next month. It would be a significant step up." My father glanced at me briefly. "That's nice, honey." Then he turned back to Rebecca. "So, tell me more about your supplier situation. Have you negotiated better rates yet?" The dismissal was so casual, so reflexive, that I wondered if he even registered what I'd said. 8 years of building something real, something that protected thousands of people's most private information reduced to 2 words and a pivot back to Rebecca's startup that would probably fold within 6 months like all the others. Later, as we moved to the living room for coffee, Rebecca sidled up to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hey, Cor, I was wondering if I could borrow your work laptop for a few days. I need to do some market research, and your company probably has access to all kinds of useful databases." I stared at her. "Rebecca, I work with protected health information, HIPAA-regulated data. I can't just let anyone access my work system. I could lose my job. I could face federal charges." Her expression shifted, a flash of something cold, before she covered it with a laugh. "God, you're so dramatic. It's not like I'd do anything wrong. We're sisters." I held my ground. "The answer is no." She walked away without another word, but I saw the resentment settling into her shoulders. As I sipped my coffee, my eyes drifted to an old photograph hanging on the wall. It was from 12 years ago, all 4 of us standing in front of this house with forced smiles. That was the year my father's construction company nearly went under. The year I worked 3 jobs sold. My car emptied my savings account to help him survive. No one ever mentioned it anymore. That chapter had been erased from family history, along with any gratitude for what I'd done. I didn't know it then, but that photograph would be the last thing I looked at before everything changed. The photograph was still on my mind when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a notification from our family group chat. Rebecca had posted something. When I opened the message, my stomach dropped. It was a picture of me from last Thanksgiving, slumped in an armchair with my mouth hanging open, clearly exhausted and caught mid-nap after working a double shift the day before. The caption read, "Found our family's sleeping beauty." Maybe, if she relaxed more and judged less, she wouldn't be so tired all the time. The comments were already rolling in from cousins and aunts. Laughing emojis. "Poor Courtney." One uncle wrote, "She looks dead to the world." I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks as I looked up from my phone to find Rebecca watching me, with a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I stood up from the couch and walked over to where she was sitting. I kept my voice low, trying not to make a scene. "Take it down, Rebecca. That's not funny." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on. It's just a joke. Everyone thinks it's hilarious. Why do you always have to be so serious about everything?" "I asked you to take it down." My father's voice cut through the room. "What's going on over there?" Rebecca immediately shifted into her wounded act, her voice rising to make sure everyone could hear. "I just posted a silly photo, and Courtney is freaking out on me. I was only trying to lighten the mood because she's been so tense all evening." Martin looked at me with that familiar expression of tired disappointment. "Courtney, it's just a picture. Your sister didn't mean any harm. You're being oversensitive." "Dad," she posted it to humiliate me, right after I told her no, about the laptop. "See, this is what I'm talking about." My father set down his coffee cup and turned to face me fully. "You always have to make everything into a federal case. It's a family group chat. Nobody outside this family is going to see it. You're embarrassing yourself by overreacting." I felt something crack inside my chest. Not break, not yet, but crack. "So I'm supposed to just accept being mocked because it's family?" Martin's jaw tightened. "In this family, when you do something wrong, you apologise. Especially you, Courtney. You're the eldest. You should set an example. Instead of attacking your sister, maybe you should think about why she felt hurt enough to post that picture in the first place." The words hit me like a physical blow. In 35 years, I had never once heard my father ask Rebecca to apologise to me. Not when she borrowed my car in college and returned it with a dent she never paid for. Not when she told my ex-boyfriend I was difficult and not worth the trouble. Not when she forgot my birthday 3 years in a row, but expected elaborate celebrations for hers. The rules in this family had always been different for us, but hearing him say it out loud made the injustice impossible to ignore. I excused myself to the bathroom, needing a moment away from all of them. I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was tired. Not just physically tired, but tired of fighting battles she could never win. When I returned to the living room, I found Rebecca stepping away from my bag with suspicious quickness. Her hands were behind her back and her expression was too innocent. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Nothing. I was looking for lip balm. I thought you might have some in your purse." I looked at my bag. It had been moved. The laptop case that I'd tucked beside it was now positioned differently, and Rebecca's fingers had a faint residue of the sanitizer I kept on the laptop's surface. She'd tried to access it. The fingerprint sensor wouldn't have worked for her, and the password screen must have stopped her cold. "Stay away from my things, Rebecca." She shrugged and walked past me without another word. I was gathering my belongings to leave when my mother appeared at my side. Linda glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then leaned close to my ear. "Courtney, you should know something." Her voice was barely a whisper. There was a time when Rebecca did something like this to someone else. At your company, actually, a few years back. I shouldn't say more, but please, be careful. Before I could ask what she meant, she squeezed my arm once and walked away toward the kitchen. I tried to follow her, but my father called out, asking if anyone wanted dessert, and the moment was gone. I drove home that night with my mother's words echoing in my head. Something like this, to someone else, at my company. What did that mean? What had Rebecca done, and why had my mother kept it secret until now? Sleep wouldn't come. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the evening. The dismissal, the humiliation, the way Rebecca's hand had hovered over my laptop, my mother's cryptic warning. By 2 a.m, I had made a decision. I was done being the family doormat. I was done apologising for having standards. And I was done pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. But before I could act, I needed to find out what my mother was hiding. Because whatever Rebecca had done before, I had a feeling it was about to happen again. Whatever Rebecca had done before, I knew I couldn't wait to find out. The answers would have to come later. Right now, I needed to protect myself from whatever she was planning next. I didn't go home that night. I had told my parents I would stay over since family dinners usually ran late, and my old bedroom was always kept ready for me. That decision would turn out to be the most important one I'd made in years. Around 10 o'clock, Rebecca cornered me in the hallway outside my room. Her arms were crossed and her face was twisted with anger. "You humiliated me in front of everyone tonight," she hissed, refusing to help me, making me look like some kind of criminal for asking a simple favour. "You owe me an apology." I almost laughed. "I owe you an apology. You posted an embarrassing photo of me to the entire family and tried to break into my laptop." "I didn't try to break into anything, and that photo was just a joke. You're the one who made everything awkward by being so uptight about your precious work files." Our voices must have carried because my father appeared at the end of the hallway. His expression was thunderous. "What is going on now? I thought we settled this." Rebecca immediately turned on the tears. "Dad, Courtney is still attacking me. I just wanted her to help me with my business, and she's acting like I asked her to commit a crime. All I wanted was to borrow her laptop for a few hours." Martin turned to me. His eyes were cold in a way I hadn't seen before. "Courtney, I've had enough of this. Your sister asked for a small favour, and you've turned it into a 3-hour drama. This family is supposed to support each other. Dad, what she's asking could get me fired. It could get me prosecuted. There are federal laws protecting the data on that laptop." He waved his hand dismissively. "You always have an excuse. You always have a reason why you can't help anyone but yourself. I'm done listening to it." He took a step closer to me, and I could see Rebecca smirking behind his shoulder. "Until you apologise to your sister for the way you've treated her tonight, your privileges in this house are suspended. No room key, no Wi-Fi password, nothing. You can stay the night, but tomorrow you'll make this right, or you'll find somewhere else to be." I stared at him. I was 35 years old. I owned my own home. I had a career that would make most parents proud. And my father was treating me like a misbehaving teenager being sent to her room without supper. The absurdity of it might have been funny if it didn't hurt so much. Rebecca's smirk widened. She thought she had won. She thought I would crumble apologise hand over whatever she wanted just to restore peace. That's what I had always done before. That's what the old Courtney would have done. But something had shifted inside me. Maybe it was the photograph on the wall reminding me of sacrifices no one remembered. Maybe it was my mother's whispered warning. Maybe it was simply 35 years of being the responsible one finally reaching a breaking point. I looked at my father, then I looked at my sister, and I said 2 words. "All right then." They both seemed surprised by my calm tone. Rebecca's smirk faltered slightly. My father nodded, as if he had won some great victory. "Good. We'll talk in the morning." They went to bed believing they had put me in my place. They had no idea what those 2 words actually meant. I waited until the house was completely silent. I could hear my father snoring from down the hall and the faint sound of Rebecca's television playing something through her bedroom wall. It was just past 1 in the morning when I crept out of my room and retrieved my laptop from my bag. I sat in the darkness of the living room and got to work. First, I activated the monitoring software that came standard on all company devices. Every keystroke, every file accessed, every website visited would be recorded and logged with timestamps. Then, I changed my password. Instead of the complex combination of letters, numbers, and symbols that I normally used, I typed in something simple, something obvious, something my sister would absolutely try. 6 digits that matched her birthday. If she wanted in so badly, I would give her a door she could open. At 2 in the morning, I sent an email to the IT security team at my company. I kept it brief and professional. I explained that I had reason to believe someone might attempt to access my account without authorization in the coming hours. I asked them to monitor for any unusual activity and to preserve all logs. I made sure to note the date, the time, and my location. Then, I placed the laptop on the living room table. I left it there like bait in a trap, clearly visible to anyone who walked past. By 4 in the morning, I had packed everything I cared about into my car. I moved quietly through the house, taking only what was mine. Before I left, I placed an envelope on my father's favourite chair, the leather recliner where he sat every evening to watch the news. Inside was a letter I'd written in the darkness of my childhood bedroom. It contained everything I had never been brave enough to say out loud, along with evidence that would make my family see me differently. Or maybe it would make them see themselves. I drove away before the sun came up. In my rearview mirror, the house grew smaller until it disappeared entirely. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry. I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt free. Somewhere behind me, my laptop sat waiting on that table. I knew my sister wouldn't be able to resist. I knew her greed and her entitlement would lead her straight into the trap I had set. And when she clicked that login button, when she typed in that simple password and thought she had finally gotten what she wanted, everything would change. The trap would snap shut, and there would be no one to blame but herself. The trap would snap shut, and I would be ready. I spent Monday morning in my own apartment, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise through my kitchen window. My phone sat on the counter beside me, silent for now. I knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. Back at my parents' house, I could picture exactly what was happening. Rebecca would have woken up around 6, eager to witness my humiliation. She would have expected to find me red-eyed and apologetic, ready to beg for forgiveness and hand over whatever she wanted. Instead, she found my bedroom empty, my car gone, and my laptop sitting on the living room table, like a gift waiting to be unwrapped. I knew my sister. I knew her entitlement, her impatience, her absolute certainty that rules applied to everyone except her. She wouldn't have hesitated. She would have seen that laptop and felt vindicated, as if the universe was finally giving her what she deserved. She would have sat down, tried the most obvious password she could think of, and felt a surge of triumph when it actually worked. What happened next was exactly what I had predicted. The monitoring software recorded everything. Rebecca didn't just look around. She went hunting. She opened folders, searched through directories, downloaded anything that looked potentially useful for her business ventures. Client databases, market analysis reports, files with names that suggested valuable information inside. She had no way of knowing that those files contained protected health information belonging to thousands of patients. Names, addresses, medical histories, insurance details. The kind of data that federal law exists specifically to protect. Then she made her fatal mistake. She uploaded several of those files to a public business forum, asking for advice on how to use the data for market research. She attached her real email address. She didn't even try to hide what she was doing because it never occurred to her that there might be consequences. In Rebecca's world, there never had been. I went back to work on Monday, as if nothing had happened. I attended meetings, answered emails, reviewed security protocols. The irony wasn't lost on me. On Tuesday, I had lunch with a colleague and discussed weekend plans. I slept soundly both nights, something I hadn't done in years. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't carrying the weight of my family's dysfunction on my shoulders. I had set it down and walked away. Wednesday morning, everything changed. The company's automated security system flagged unusual activity associated with my account. Data had been accessed from an unfamiliar location and uploaded to an external site. The breach was serious enough to trigger an immediate investigation. IT security traced the access point to an IP address registered to my parents' house. They cross-referenced this information with the email I had sent Sunday night, the one warning them that unauthorized access might be attempted. Within hours, the legal department was involved. By noon, phone calls were being made. I was in my office when my supervisor appeared at my door with 2 people from Human Resources and a representative from our legal team. They asked me to explain the situation. I told them everything. I showed them the email I had sent warning of potential unauthorized access. I explained that my sister had repeatedly attempted to gain access to my work laptop, despite my refusals. I described how I had deliberately left the device where she could find it, knowing she would take the bait, because I needed documented proof of her behaviour to protect myself. They listened without interruption. When I finished, the legal representative nodded slowly. You did exactly the right thing by alerting IT in advance. Your warning email established a clear timeline. The monitoring logs show that access came from someone other than you. You're not under any suspicion. She paused, but I need you to understand the severity of what happened. Protected health information was exposed. This isn't just a company matter anymore. This is federal. Meanwhile, at my parents' house, chaos was unfolding. I learned later what happened when the phone calls started coming. My father answered the first one from HR, confused and irritated at being disturbed. His confusion turned to alarm when they asked to speak with whoever had accessed Courtney Neal's work computer from this address. The second call came from the company's legal team. The third came from a representative who explained that federal authorities had been notified of a potential HIPAA violation. That was when my father found the envelope. He had been so distracted by the phone calls that he hadn't noticed it sitting on his chair. When he finally tore it open, he found my letter inside. I had written it in the darkness before I left, choosing every word carefully. I knew Rebecca wouldn't be able to resist. I've been warning you both for years that she doesn't respect boundaries, that she takes whatever she wants without thinking about consequences. But you never listened. You always took her side. You always made excuses. This time I documented everything, every keystroke, every file she touched, every piece of evidence that proves what she did. I had ended with one final line that I knew would haunt him. This isn't the first time Rebecca has done something like this to someone, but it will be the last time I suffer for it. My father read that letter 3 times before the words sank in. His perfect daughter, his golden child, had just committed a federal crime using stolen access. And his other daughter, the one he had dismissed and punished and ignored for 35 years, had seen it coming. She had warned him. She had given him every chance to listen. And when he refused, she had protected herself the only way she could. Rebecca was crying in the living room when Martin confronted her with the letter. She tried to deny everything at first, then switched to claiming she didn't know the files were important, then finally broke down and blamed me for setting her up. But there was one question she couldn't answer. What did Courtney mean by not the first time? What else had Rebecca done that no one knew about? What else had Rebecca done? That question was about to tear my family apart even further than I had anticipated. My father called me 17 times on Thursday morning. I let every call go to voicemail until I was ready to speak on my own terms. When I finally answered, I didn't give him a chance to lecture me or demand explanations. I had information to deliver, and I intended to deliver it without interruption. Before you say anything, Dad, I need you to listen. After Mum warned me on Sunday night, I did some digging. I looked into the company's records from 2 years ago. There was an incident involving an intern named Sarah Chen. She was accused of leaking confidential client data and fired on the spot. Her career was destroyed. She couldn't get another job in the industry because the accusation followed her everywhere. I paused to let the words sink in. The IP address that the leaked data was traced to, it was registered to your house. The same house where Rebecca was living at the time while she tried to get her first online business off the ground. Silence on the other end of the line. I continued. Rebecca used your internet connection to access files. She had no right to touch. When the company investigated, the trail led to your address, but nobody connected it to her. Sarah Chen was the convenient scapegoat. A young woman just starting her career lost everything because my sister wanted shortcuts for her failing business and didn't care who got hurt. I could hear my father breathing heavily. In the background, I heard my mother's voice asking what was wrong. Then I heard something I had never heard before in my life. My mother started crying. Not quiet tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that carried through the phone, even though she wasn't the one holding it. Linda, what is it? My father demanded. What do you know about this? My mother's confession came spilling out between sobs. She had known. 2 years ago, when the news about Sarah Chen's firing spread through the company, Rebecca had come to her in a panic. She admitted what she had done, but begged Linda not to tell anyone. She claimed it was an accident, that she didn't mean for anyone to get hurt, that she would never do it again. My mother, desperate to protect her daughter, had agreed to keep the secret. She told herself it was the right thing to do for the family, but the guilt had eaten at her ever since. Every time she saw a story about someone losing their job unfairly, she thought about Sarah Chen. Every time she looked at Rebecca, she wondered what kind of person she had helped her daughter become. I listened to all of this through the phone, feeling a strange mix of vindication and sadness. My mother had known. She had watched an innocent woman's life get destroyed and said nothing. She had watched me get dismissed and overlooked for years while protecting the daughter who deserved protection the least. The memories came flooding back then, unbidden and unwelcome. 12 years ago, I was 23 years old and had just started my first real job. My father's construction company was failing. He had made bad investments, trusted the wrong partners, and found himself drowning in debt. He was weeks away from losing the house, the business, everything he had built over 30 years. I remember the night he sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands, looking more broken than I had ever seen him. Rebecca was away at college, oblivious to the crisis. My mother was paralyzed with fear. So, I stepped up. I took on 2 extra jobs, working nights and weekends until I barely slept. I sold my car and took the bus everywhere. I emptied my savings account, every penny I had been putting away since high school. I gave it all to my father without being asked and without expecting anything in return. He survived. The company recovered. Within a few years, he was more successful than ever. And somewhere along the way, he forgot. Or maybe he chose to forget because remembering meant acknowledging that his eldest daughter had saved him when he couldn't save himself. I became the living reminder of his lowest moment, his greatest shame. Every time he looked at me, he saw his own failure reflected back. So, he stopped looking. He turned all his attention to Rebecca instead. She was confident, carefree, unburdened by the knowledge of his near collapse. Loving her was easy. Loving me meant facing something he couldn't bear to face. I understood all of this now with painful clarity. The favoritism wasn't about Rebecca being better or more deserving. It was about my father's inability to confront his own weakness. He had spent 12 years compensating for a debt he refused to acknowledge, and in doing so, he had created a monster who believed she could take whatever she wanted without consequences. Courtney, My father's voice was hoarse when he finally spoke again. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Dad. But there's one more thing you should know. I took a deep breath. 2 years ago, when Rebecca got Sarah Chen fired, the company almost pressed charges. They would have, except someone intervened. Someone paid Sarah a settlement to make the whole thing go away quietly. I have the bank records. I know exactly where that money came from. The silence that followed was deafening, because the money had come from Martin. He had known all along, and now I had proof. But confronting my father with that evidence would have to wait. Friday morning, I had a meeting that would determine the course of my entire career. I walked into the executive conference room at 9 o'clock sharp, wearing my best suit and carrying a folder containing every piece of documentation I'd gathered over the past week. The company's CEO was there, along with the head of human resources, the chief legal counsel, and 2 representatives from the Federal Compliance Division. The gravity of the situation was written on every face in the room. The chief legal counsel spoke first. She reviewed the timeline of events, starting with my warning email sent at 2 a.m. on Monday and ending with the discovery of the data breach on Wednesday. The monitoring software had captured everything in perfect detail. Every file Rebecca accessed, every download she made, every upload to that public business forum. The timestamps proved beyond any doubt that the unauthorized access occurred while I was miles away from my parents' house, already back in my own apartment. Ms. Neal, the CEO said, leaning forward in his chair, I want to be absolutely clear about something. You are not under any suspicion. Your proactive communication with IT security, combined with the comprehensive documentation you maintained, has actually helped us identify and contain this breach far more quickly than would otherwise have been possible. You did exactly what a security professional should do when faced with a potential threat. I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't even realized was tight. For days, I had been preparing myself for the possibility that I might lose everything despite doing nothing wrong. Hearing those words from the CEO himself was more than vindication. It was recognition of the kind I had spent my entire career working toward. The legal counsel then shifted the conversation to my sister. She explained the situation in terms that left no room for misunderstanding. Rebecca's actions constituted multiple violations of federal law. The Computer Fraud and Abuse Act covered unauthorized access to protected computer systems. The Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, known as HIPAA, covered the exposure of protected health information. Together, these violations carried potential consequences that made my stomach turn, even though I knew Rebecca had brought them entirely on herself. Federal charges were almost certain. Fines could reach up to $250,000. Prison sentences for violations of this severity typically ranged from 1 to 5 years. The company had no choice but to file a formal report with federal authorities. The matter was now out of their hands and into the jurisdiction of the Department of Justice. I sat quietly as this information washed over me. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction that Rebecca would finally face real consequences for her actions. Another part felt something closer to grief. This was my sister. We had grown up in the same house, shared the same parents, played together as children. How had we ended up here on opposite sides of a federal investigation? But then I remembered Sarah Chen. I remembered the innocent woman whose life Rebecca had destroyed 2 years ago, without a second thought. I remembered that my father had known and had paid to make it all go away. Whatever sympathy I might have felt evaporated in the face of that memory. The meeting took an unexpected turn when the CEO cleared his throat and exchanged glances with the head of human resources. Ms. Neal, there's something else we'd like to discuss with you. As you may know, we're opening a new regional headquarters next month. We've been searching for the right person to lead our data security division there. Given your exceptional handling of this crisis, your years of dedicated service, and your obvious commitment to protecting our patients' information, we'd like to offer you the position of Director of Data Security. I stared at him, certain I had misheard. Director. It was the promotion I had been working toward for years, the goal that had seemed perpetually just out of reach. And now it was being handed to me, not despite the chaos of the past week, but because of how I had navigated it. The position is based in Portland, he continued. I understand that would mean relocating, but we're prepared to offer a comprehensive relocation package along with a significant salary increase. Portland. Hundreds of miles away from my parents, from Rebecca, from the house where I had spent 35 years being overlooked and undervalued. The distance felt less like a sacrifice and more like a gift. I accept, I said without hesitation. After the meeting concluded, I made one more important decision. I called my personal attorney and instructed her to send formal notice to my family. From this point forward, all communication would go through legal channels. I was done with ambush phone calls, surprise visits, and emotional manipulation. If Martin or Rebecca or even my mother wanted to speak with me, they could do so through proper representation. I was no longer available to be their convenient target. I spent the rest of Friday afternoon in my apartment packing boxes and making arrangements for my move. The sun was setting when I heard a knock at my door. I looked through the peephole and saw exactly what I had expected. My father stood in the hallway, his face haggard and desperate. Behind him, my mother clutched her purse with white-knuckled hands, and behind her, red-eyed and trembling, stood Rebecca. I opened the door, but did not invite them in. I stood in the doorway, blocking their entrance, and looked at each of them in turn. They didn't find the meek daughter, who always backed him down. They found a woman who finally knew her worth. Before you say anything, I told them, there's one more truth you need to hear. There was one more truth they needed to hear, but Rebecca spoke before I could continue. Her voice was high and desperate tears streaming down her face as she pushed past our parents towards me. Courtney, please, you have to understand. I never meant for any of this to happen. You set me up. You left that laptop there on purpose because you knew I would use it. This is your fault as much as it is mine. I held up my hand to stop her. I gave you every opportunity to make a different choice. I told you no. I explained why. And instead of respecting that you waited until I left and took what you wanted anyway. That's not my fault, Rebecca. That's a pattern you've been following your entire life. My father stepped forward, his jaw set, in that stubborn way I knew so well. Courtney, enough. This has gone too far. Whatever point you were trying to make, you've made it. Now it's time to fix this as a family. You need to call your company and tell them you don't want to press charges. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I almost laughed. Dad, this isn't a parking ticket. Rebecca violated federal law. The company has already filed their report. Even if I wanted to make this go away, I couldn't. And honestly, I don't want to. She needs to face consequences for once in her life. Martin's face reddened. We're blood, Courtney. You can't do this to your own sister. Think about what people will say. Think about our family's reputation. Think about what this will do to your mother. There it was, the familiar manipulation, the appeal to family loyalty that had kept me silent and compliant for 35 years. But something had changed in me over the past week. I had finally seen the truth of how this family operated, and I refused to be part of it anymore. You've used your role as my father to protect Rebecca from every consequence her whole life, I said, keeping my voice steady even though my heart was pounding. Every time she made a mistake, you covered it up. Every time she hurt someone, you made excuses. Every time she crossed a line, you pretended it didn't happen. And what's the result? She doesn't understand boundaries. She doesn't understand that actions have consequences. And now she's facing federal charges that could send her to prison. Is that love? Dad is protecting her from reality the same as loving her, or is it the very thing that destroyed her? The words hung in the air between us. Rebecca had stopped crying, staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. My father's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. And then, from behind both of them, my mother spoke. Courtney is right. The room went absolutely silent. We all turned to look at Linda, who was standing with her hands clasped in front of her, tears running down her cheeks, but her voice surprisingly steady. "Mum," Rebecca's voice cracked. Linda shook her head slowly. "I've been quiet for too long. I've watched this family tear itself apart trying to protect you, Rebecca, and I've said nothing because I was afraid. Afraid of conflict, afraid of losing you, afraid of what would happen if I told the truth." She took a shaky breath. "I knew what you did 2 years ago was wrong. I knew an innocent woman lost her career because of you. And I kept that secret because you begged me to, because I thought I was protecting you. But I wasn't protecting you. I was enabling you. And in doing so, I lost Courtney." She turned to face me directly. "I lost the daughter who sacrificed everything for this family when we needed her most. The daughter who worked 3 jobs to save her father's business and never asked for anything in return. The daughter who has spent her entire adult life being overlooked and dismissed while I stood by and let it happen." Her voice broke. "I'm so sorry, Courtney. I'm so sorry I wasn't brave enough to stand up for you sooner." I felt tears prick at my own eyes, but I blinked them back. This was not the time to break down. Not yet. Rebecca looked between our mother and me, her face crumpling as the last of her defences fell away. "I knew," she whispered. "I knew what I was doing was wrong, both times. I knew Sarah Chen didn't deserve what happened to her. I knew accessing your laptop was illegal. I just didn't care." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking much smaller than her 31 years. "I was jealous of you, Courtney. I've always been jealous. You built a real career while everything I touched fell apart. You earned respect while I kept failing. And instead of working harder or being better, I wanted to take what you had. I wanted to prove that you weren't so special after all." The confession should have felt satisfying. Instead, it just felt sad. My sister had spent years nursing a jealousy that had curdled into something toxic, and our parents had enabled every step of her descent. But my father wasn't finished. His face had grown darker as he listened to my mother and sister speak, and now he stepped forward with something dangerous in his eyes. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "You're all acting like Courtney is some kind of saint. She's not. She planned this whole thing. She manipulated all of us." He turned to me with a sneer. "You think you're better than us. You think you're so righteous. Let me tell you something, daughter. I know things about you too. I know secrets you've kept. And if you don't make this go away, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you really are." I stared at my father, this man who had taken my sacrifice and buried it, who had chosen my sister over me for 12 years, who even now was threatening me rather than accepting responsibility. "Go ahead, Dad," I said quietly. "Tell them whatever you want, but first, let me show you what I found in your financial records from 2 years ago. Let me show you what I found in your financial records from 2 years ago." I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder I had been carrying with me since Thursday. Inside were printed copies of emails and bank transfer records that I had obtained through channels my father never anticipated. I handed them to him and watched his face change as he realised what he was looking at. "2 years ago, you paid $50,000 to Sarah Chen," I said. "You convinced her to drop her complaint against the company and sign a non-disclosure agreement. You also made calls to the executive board reminding them how much business your construction company brought to their clients, suggesting it would be unfortunate if that relationship were damaged by an ugly legal battle." I paused to let the weight of my words settle. "You knew exactly what Rebecca did. You knew she was responsible for that data breach, not Sarah. And instead of holding your daughter accountable, you paid to make the problem disappear. You let an innocent woman lose her career to protect Rebecca's reputation. Or maybe it wasn't Rebecca's reputation you were protecting. Maybe it was your own." My father stared at the documents in his hands. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then slowly the fight drained out of him. His shoulders sagged. The anger in his eyes faded into something that looked almost like defeat. "I thought I was protecting her," he said quietly. "I thought if I could just make it go away, she would learn from it. She would do better." He shook his head. "But that's not true, is it? I wasn't protecting Rebecca. I was protecting myself. I couldn't stand the thought of people knowing my daughter was a criminal. I couldn't bear the shame of it. So I buried the truth and told myself it was for her own good." He looked up at me, and for the first time in my life I saw my father clearly, not as the powerful, confident man who had built a business empire, but as a frightened person who had spent years running from his own failures. He had buried the memory of his financial collapse because it shamed him. He had buried Rebecca's crime for the same reason, and in doing so, he had taught her that there would always be someone to clean up her messes, no matter how terrible they were. "I created this," he whispered. "I created her, and I lost you in the process." The weeks that followed were difficult for everyone. Rebecca was formally charged under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Her attorney negotiated a plea deal that spared her prison time in exchange for a guilty plea to reduce charges. She received 2 years of probation, $75,000 in fines and restitution, and a permanent criminal record that would follow her for the rest of her life. She was also required to write formal letters of apology to me, to the company, and to Sarah Chen, the intern, whose life she had destroyed 2 years earlier. My father's role in the cover-up became known in business circles within weeks. Word travels fast when someone powerful falls from grace. He lost 2 major contracts almost immediately, and his reputation took a hit that would take years to repair if it ever fully recovered. But I think the worst punishment for Martin was having to live with the knowledge of what his protection had cost. He had spent years shielding Rebecca from consequences, and the result was a daughter facing federal charges, and another daughter who wanted nothing to do with him. As for Sarah Chen, I made sure she finally got justice. I connected her with the company's legal team and provided all the evidence I had gathered. She received a substantial settlement and a formal apology acknowledging that she had been wrongfully terminated. Her professional record was cleared, and she was offered a position at another firm with a glowing recommendation. It wasn't enough to undo the 2 years she had lost, but it was something. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment in Portland, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of orange and pink. The move had been everything I needed. I had colleagues who respected my work, a corner office, with a view and a life that was entirely my own. For the first time in 35 years, I woke up each morning without the weight of my family's expectations pressing down on me. I had found something I never knew I was missing. I had found peace. My mother called occasionally. Our conversations were cautious at first, full of long pauses and careful words. But slowly we were rebuilding something that felt almost like a real relationship. She had started therapy, she told me, trying to understand why she had spent so many years staying silent when she should have spoken up. I appreciated her effort. I wasn't ready to fully forgive her yet, but I was willing to try. My father sent a written apology about a month after I moved. It was 3 pages long, handwritten clearly the product of many drafts. He acknowledged everything he had done wrong, from burying the memory of my sacrifice 12 years ago, to covering up Rebecca's crimes, to treating me as less than I deserved. I read every word. Then I put the letter in a drawer. I wasn't ready to respond. Maybe someday I would be. Maybe not. Either way, it was my choice to make, and that felt like its own kind of freedom. Rebecca. I heard through my mother was working a retail job at a department store. It was her first honest work in years, the first time she had ever had to earn a paycheck through actual labour rather than schemes and shortcuts. Maybe hitting rock bottom would be the wake-up call she needed to become a better person. Maybe it wouldn't. That was no longer my burden to carry. I was still standing on the balcony, letting the ocean breeze wash over me when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made me answer anyway. "Hello, is this Courtney Neal?" The voice on the other end was hesitant, nervous. "Yes, this is Courtney. My name is Sarah. Sarah Chen. I'm the intern who was fired 2 years ago because of your sister." There was a pause, and I heard her take a shaky breath. "I just wanted to call and say thank you. Because of what you did, I finally got my life back. I got my reputation back. I got a chance to start over." Her voice cracked slightly. "I spent 2 years thinking nobody would ever believe me. And then you came along and proved the truth. I don't know how to thank you enough." I felt tears prick at my eyes as I looked out at the water. "You don't have to thank me, Sarah. I just did what was right." "That's exactly why I'm thanking you, because doing the right thing isn't easy, and you did it anyway." After we said goodbye, I stayed on the balcony for a long time watching the last light fade from the sky. I thought about everything that had led me to this moment, the years of being overlooked, the sacrifice no one remembered, the trap I had set and the truths I had uncovered. And I realised something profound. Respect isn't something you beg for. It isn't something you earn by shrinking yourself to make others comfortable. Respect is something you create by setting boundaries and holding them even when it's hard, even when it costs you. I had finally learned to respect myself, and in doing so, I had helped someone else find her way back too. Maybe healing isn't just a solo journey after all. And so Courtney's story comes to an end, but the questions it raises stay with us long after the final words fade. This is a story about family, about loyalty, about the invisible lines we draw, and the courage it takes to defend them. It is about a woman who spent 35 years giving everything to people who took her for granted, and the moment she finally decided that enough was enough. When I first heard Courtney's story, I couldn't stop thinking about how many of us have been in her shoes. Maybe not in the exact same way. Maybe your family never asked you to compromise your career or break the law. But how many of us have felt invisible at our own dinner tables? How many of us have watched a sibling receive praise while our own accomplishments went unnoticed? How many of us have been told to apologise when we did nothing wrong simply to keep the peace? Courtney's father told her that the eldest should set an example. But what kind of example does it set when we teach our children that some people's feelings matter more than others? Martin thought he was protecting Rebecca by shielding her from consequences. Instead, he created a person who believed the rules didn't apply to her, someone who could destroy an innocent woman's career without losing a moment's sleep. The saddest part of this story isn't Rebecca's crimes or Martin's cover-ups. The saddest part is how long it took for anyone to see Courtney clearly. She saved her father's business when she was barely more than a girl. She built a career protecting other people's most sensitive information. She tried again and again to set boundaries, and every single time she was dismissed, overlooked, made to feel like her concerns were less important than her sister's wants. But here's what I love about Courtney's story. She didn't become bitter. She didn't seek revenge for its own sake. When she set that trap, she wasn't trying to destroy her sister. She was trying to protect herself, to finally create a record of the behaviour everyone else refused to acknowledge. And when the truth came out, she didn't gloat. She simply held her ground and let the consequences unfold naturally. That takes a kind of strength that many of us aspire to but struggle to find. It's easy to fantasize about dramatic confrontations and perfect comebacks. It's much harder to stand calmly in front of people who have hurt you and speak your truth without backing down. Courtney did that, and in doing so, she showed her family what real strength looks like. I think about Linda a lot when I reflect on this story. She knew the truth for 2 years and said nothing. She watched an innocent woman suffer and convinced herself that silence was the same as love. Linda's decision to finally speak up, to stand with Courtney, even though it meant admitting her own failures, was one of the bravest moments in this entire story. It came late, maybe too late to undo all the damage, but it came, and that matters. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been the Courtney in your family, the one who gives and gives while others take? Have you ever had to set a boundary that cost you a relationship? Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was not the person you thought they were? Share your stories in the comments below. Let's build a community where we can support each other through difficult moments and celebrate the victories, no matter how small. If this story moved you, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. We bring you stories like this every week. Stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. Stories about courage and resilience and the complicated nature of love. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this community. And remember, respect isn't something you beg for. It's something you create by knowing your worth and refusing to accept less than you deserve. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.